morning, so we will get started. The committee will come to order. Today we're considering the fiscal year 2016 Financial Services and General Government Bill. As you know, this subcommittee has jurisdiction over a wide and diverse group of agencies and activities, including financial regulators, tax collection, the White House, federal courts, DC, GSA, and the Small Business Administration. The priorities and funding levels for this bill, it's the product of the subcommittee's work on 10 different hearings that we held and more than 1,500 requests from members on both sides of the aisle which we received. So this bill provides $20.2 billion in discretionary funding, which is $1.3 billion or 6% less than the fiscal year 2015, and $4.8 billion or 19% below the request. The subcommittee's allocation is a significant reduction compared to 2015. Nonetheless, the allocation is sufficient to fund programs that are critical to the essential operation of the federal government. Law enforcement and the administration of justice are among the bill's priorities, so we are increasing funding over the fiscal year 2015 level in these activities. The high-intensity drug trafficking areas program receives a $5 million increase. The Treasury's Office of Terrorism and Financial Intelligence, that's the agency that enforces our sanction program, they receive a $3.5 million increase. In addition, a nice healthy amount of funding is provided for both the federal and the DC judicial branches of government, as well as for the supervision of offenders and defendants who live and work in our communities. Another priority for the bill is supporting small businesses to foster creation and economic growth. The bill provides $156 million for SBA's business loan programs to support $23.5 billion in 7A lending and $7.5 billion in 504 lending. The bill also provides funding equal to or greater than the current fiscal year for the Small Business Development Centers, the SBA Micro Loan Assistance, SBA Veterans and Women's Programs, the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau, and the Treasury's Community Development Financial Institutions Fund program. In order to increase or maintain funding in these programs, we had to reduce funding in other programs. We reduced funding for more than two dozen agencies and programs that can operate with less, such as the Office of Management and Budget and the Federal Communications Commission. The brunt of the reduction, however, is borne by the General Services Administration and the Internal Revenue Service, since they are the two largest agencies in the bill and both have a recent history of inappropriate behavior. The bill also eliminates all GSA funding for new construction, but provides a sufficient amount for repair and alterations. Before adding new space to the federal inventory, the executive branch should take care of and make better use of what they already have. We also continue to push GSA to develop an accurate inventory of federal property and to designate funding specifically for property consolidation to reduce surplus space. The bill provides the IRS with $10.1 billion, which is $838 million below the current level and $2.8 billion below the request, but requires the IRS to make customer service a priority. In total, the IRS is funded below their fiscal year 2004 level, but the taxpayer service account is funded above fiscal year 2015 by more than $75 million to force the IRS to answer American taxpayers' phone calls and mail. It's been 2 years and 3 commissioners since we learned about the IRS inappropriate scrutiny of certain groups, and the IRS continues to make embarrassing management mistakes at the expense of customer service. To remedy this, the committee has included extensive language to, for instance, require the IRS to consider the conduct and tax compliance when it gives out bonuses or rehires former employees. We prohibit them from targeting groups for regulatory scrutiny based on their ideological beliefs or for exercising their First Amendment rights. We prohibit funds to implement the individual mandate, prohibit funds for inappropriate conferences and videos. We require a report on the amount of official time used by IRS employees for union activities, and we require extensive reporting for IRS spending. And finally, in order to increase the transparency of agencies, the bill makes the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the Office of Financial Research subject to the appropriations process. We also replaced the indemnification agreement with a confidentiality agreement for swap data repositories. We require investigative agencies to obtain emails consistent with the Fourth Amendment. We require the Federal Communications Commission to make orders publicly available for 21 days before the Commission votes on them, and require certain court challenges to be resolved before the FCC implements what is known as net neutrality. I want to thank all the members of the subcommittee for their input into the bill, thank them for their participation at our hearings this year. I want to thank Chairman Rogers for his leadership and support in advancing the bill. Thank all of our staff, both majority and majority. And in particular, I want to thank Ranking Member Mr. Serrano. I know that he doesn't believe everything is good in the bill. He probably believes that we could use additional funds, but I find that working with him, his approach to this makes this a better bill. I thank him for his input. I look forward to working closely with him as we move forward. And so now I'd like to recognize Mr. Serrano for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was noticing on the wall that they have the pictures of former chairmen, but since our committee doesn't have a room, maybe we can put your picture in the hallway, something, somewhere, figure it out of respect. Let me begin by thanking you. Lots of things that we don't agree on. You have always sought out the opinion and attempted to find the middle ground where it was available. I also want to thank the staff on both sides of the aisle for all the hours they have put into creating this bill and report. We're all thankful for the time and energy they have put into this endeavor. Before I go into detail about what our side opposes, let me mention several areas where I want to commend the majority. The Community Development Financial Institutions Fund is funded at $233.5 million, which is at the level requested by the President and $3 million above last year. The Small Business Administration is also well funded in the Chairman's mark, and important funding is included for several business loan programs like the Microloan Program, the Prime Program, Small Business Development Centers, and Women's Business Centers. In addition, the Federal Defenders are funded at the request level, which will help ensure that we live up to our constitutional obligations. Unfortunately, despite these areas of agreement, this is simply not a bill that our side can support. The mark before us is a prime example of the harm being caused by staying at the current sequestration funding level. The 302B allocation for this subcommittee is 6% below last year. No other subcommittee has such a large percentage cut from their allocation. The result is that numerous agencies are severely underfunded, and this subcommittee has been unable to invest in areas that are critical to taxpayers, consumers, investors, and federal employees. Let me detail just a few of the more troubling accounts in this bill. The IRS has cut almost $900 million from last year's funding levels. The agency below the 2004 funding level, despite the fact that there are more taxpayers and more responsibilities for the agency. Once again, this is a misguided attempt by the majority to do two things: punish the entire agency for the problems regarding 501c4 investigations, and prevent the full implementation of the Affordable Care Act. Last year, these efforts to harm the IRS ultimately hurt the taxpayer by increasing the deficit and reducing taxpayer services. In fact, for every dollar that the majority cut from the IRS last year, the estimates are that our nation lost $6 owed to it that should have been paid, collected, if you will. If this year's cuts become law, we can expect more of the same. Let me just note one serious problem with the majority's decision to underfund the IRS. We all know that the IRS suffered a well-publicized hacking attempt, which highlights the need for additional investment in IT security. Yet this bill cuts the two accounts responsible for these efforts by a total of $378 million from last year. I think members from both sides agree that we need to protect the privacy of taxpayers' information, but this bill fails in that regard. Beyond the IRS, there are severely problematic cuts to funding levels for the General Services Administration, which receives no construction funding this year. This will prevent the GSA from moving forward on important projects across the country and will harm private sector job growth. The Securities and Exchange Commission is also funded at $222 million below the President's request. The SEC is our cop on the beat for Wall Street and chronically underfunding our primary enforcement arm for the financial markets invites more wrongdoing. It is also problematic that the majority has sought to limit the use of the SEC's reserve fund, which is dedicated to IT upgrades. The Federal Communications Commission's FCC is cut by $25 million below last year's already flat level, with the majority choosing to ignore the FCC's efforts to move to a smaller and more cost-effective location. This is a very definition of penny wise and pound foolish. This funding is going to force the FCC to either expend more dollars later to move to a new location, to spend more to renew their lease at their current location, or to make more cuts to their core functions to pay for it. Unfortunately, these are not the only objectionable parts. In recent years, this bill has become a magnet for highly partisan and damaging riders in a large variety of areas. This year is no different. The riders added by the majority hurt consumers, taxpayers, federal employees, the residents of the District of Columbia, and even attacked the President of the United States. Our side has serious objections to many of the provisions added to this bill. Adding these riders, which the majority knows our side deeply opposes, is not helpful to the appropriations process or for the work we try to do on behalf of the American people. Like last year, let me mention a few of the most excessive riders. First, this bill prevents the FCC from implementing their net neutrality rule until the final disposition of 3 pending lawsuits on this issue. It's a fundamentally flawed effort from both policy and procedural perspectives. The FCC took an important step in February to help consumers and businesses alike by ensuring their internet content and access is treated the same way as everyone else's. This rider would take away these important in order to promote the interests of a few large corporations. Additionally, although it says to only last as long as the lawsuits are ongoing, the very text of the rider encourages the plaintiffs in these lawsuits to do everything in their power to delay a resolution to these cases. On another subject, I'm extremely bothered by the majority's insistence in trying to hamstring the President's efforts to conduct foreign policy with regard to Cuba. This bill contains 3 riders which would seek to reinstitute the very Cuba policies that have failed our nation for the past 50 years. The Cold War ended more than 25 years ago, and we do business with countries that have suspect human rights and democracy records, including both China and Vietnam. Yet some people seem to think that we should treat Cuba differently. As someone who has long advocated for engagement instead of isolation, I find these efforts hypocritical and unwarranted. Beyond these areas, there are numerous other problems with this bill. The IRS is prevented from reforming the 501c4 process that caused so much confusion and controversy, and from enforcing the individual mandate of the Affordable Care Act, a move that CBO says will result in a loss of revenue of $279 million in FY16 and $133 million in FY17. The SEC is prevented from requiring public corporations to disclose their political contributions, and the District of Columbia is once again prevented from using their own dollars to provide legal abortion services for low-income women. Our side strongly opposes all of these riders and many more besides. In the end, this bill is a tale of 2 problems, an inadequate allocation and unacceptable riders. While some on the right may cheer the details of this bill, I think that most Americans will look at this legislation and simply shake their heads. It is not based in reality, and I think most people realize that at the end of the day, this is not a bill that will garner the right kind of bipartisanship needed to become law. And I find that sad. The Appropriations Committee was once the place where our 2 parties could hash out their differences and find a compromise that worked in the best interest of our constituents. I keep telling people that I remember the days when Al Rogers and I, our staff, unbeknownst to us, actually did friendly wagers, and I say wagers, no money was involved, on whether the bill would get 300 votes, 350, or 400 votes, and that's what would happen on the board. I don't probably think we'll see that for a long, long time to come because of the way we behave these days. We could hash out our differences and find a compromise that worked in the best interest of all our constituents. Today demonstrates our committee has just turned to another messaging piece that seems intended to preclude the kind of agreement that the Appropriations Committee was once known for. Our party will try to fix this legislation as it moves through the process, but until the other side faces reality and realizes that sequestration cannot continue, it will be difficult to improve the bill at the current allocation. As it is, this is not a bill that our side will support. And before I thank you, Mr. Chairman, usually in these kind of statements, people think we have throwaway lines. It is not a throwaway line when I tell you that I hope that as the process moves along, we can both work on making this a better bill and see where it takes us. But right now, in the way that it is crafted, it's pretty difficult for anybody on this side to support this bill, starting with the ranking member. And I thank you.
Thank you. And now I'd like to recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Rogers, for an opening statement. Pull that thing forward.
Does it work? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for a good job on this bill. I'm sorry Mr. Serrano just got up on the wrong side of the bed this morning. I'm sure he, in due course of time, will see the beauty of this bill and will come aboard with big-time support. The two of you have worked together, your staffs have worked together, and I think it's a bill that deserves everyone's support. You include discretionary funding of $20.2 billion. That is a reduction of 6.1% below current levels, but those reductions comply with the Budgetary Control Act and the caps that we were handed by the Budget Committee and the House, as well as to keep true to the conservative promise to reduce the size and scope of the federal government. The bill before us today strikes an appropriate balance by prioritizing important programs that provide critical services to the American people and reducing others that are poor performing or non-essential. As the chairman has noted, this legislation continues this committee's strong commitment to essential law enforcement functions, and particularly we once again reject the president's massive cut that he proposed for the high-intensity drug trafficking areas program, and instead fund the HIDAs at $250 million, which is a $57 million increase above the request and $5 million over the current level. HIDAs, for those who are not familiar with it, provide a critically important function in the regions of our country completely besieged by illegal drug trafficking and abuse. And that includes my area of Kentucky. We were a dozen years ago called the pain capital of America, with OxyContin overdose deaths reaching record levels. And as we continue to fight that scourge of prescription drug abuse in our area, the Appalachian HIDA has been a valued partner in combating this unique law enforcement and public health crisis. CDC calls it a crisis. More people are dying from prescription drug overdoses than car wrecks in this country. And I know other regions of the country, in fact all over the country, are suffering now from the effects of this growing epidemic. For this reason, I'm also pleased that the bill funds the Drug-Free Communities program, $95 million. That's $10 million over the president's request, so that we can increase access to successful community-based prevention and treatment initiatives. As we can see an increase in opioid abuse around the country, these initiatives are as critical as ever. I started in my district a dozen years ago, a group called UNITE. Unlawful narcotics, investigations, treatment, education, a holistic approach to the problem. You can't arrest your way out of the problem, you can't cure your way out of the problem, and you can't educate your way out of the problem. But you've got to do all those things at the same time to help make it work, and it's working. UNITE is working. The law enforcement arm of UNITE has put some 3,700 pushers in jail. We've got treatment centers, we've got education programs in all the schools, Unite clubs in most all the schools, and it's a great program, but it could not have been possible without the high-intensity drug trafficking area, the HIDTA of Appalachia. So I commend it to you, commend them to you. Other areas of importance in the bill include funding for financial programs that support the development of small business. Within the SBA, you increase funding for entrepreneurial development programs, while also fully funding the business loans account, hub zones, women's business centers, and veterans outreach programs. Furthermore, the bill includes robust funding for the Community Development Financial Institutions Fund, CDFI. Taken together, these programs can provide a lifeline for communities struggling to generate economic opportunities and jobs. As the nation's economic recovery moves slowly along, they're critically important in regions that continue to lag behind the national average in unemployment. Additionally, the bill continues to rein in agencies that have not been adequately performing on behalf of the taxpayer. In addition to funding cuts for the IRS, there are numerous provisions and reporting requirements that will provide the Congress strong oversight over these agencies in order for us to continue to weed out waste, fraud, and abuse. Furthermore, the bill brings two agencies that have been instrumental in implementing Dodd-Frank under the appropriations process for the first time in fiscal 2017. I'm sure you hear, if there's one complaint I hear back home from the small business community and the banking community, it is the smothering effect of these Dodd-Frank regulations that are keeping the banks from lending money to small businesses, especially because of the huge amount of paperwork and staff that have to be assigned to processing those types of loans. Having the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the Office of Financial Research under the annual appropriations process, it will give Congress and the American people much needed oversight and transparency of these powerful agencies and let them know that they do have somebody to answer to. And it's the people of this country by way of the Congress through its Appropriations Committee in the process. Finally, Mr. Chairman, during this time of monumental deficits and skyrocketing debt, this bill terminates several programs, focuses on oversight and management. So this is a good bill. I think you've done a wonderful job. My friend Joe Serrano, in spite of his current opposition, I'm sure we'll see the light and come around to support this process before it's over. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, are there any other members that would like to be recognized? Mr. Bishop?
Push the button.
Pull it forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know the subcommittee is pressed for time, but I wanted to say a few words about one aspect of the bill that I find very troubling, and I think Mr. Serrano referenced it. I know it's not the most popular, even the most politically wise thing to do to defend the Internal Revenue Service, but it doesn't seem to make any sense to me to complain about the work of the IRS and then slice its budget $838 million below the FY15 enacted level and $2.8 billion below the President's request. We all know that severe budget cuts have led to fewer audits, longer appeals, delayed refunds, and poorer service by the IRS. It also has led to billions and billions of dollars in lost tax revenue, money that could be used to repair our roads and our bridges and even to reduce the deficit, as opposed to lining the pockets of tax cheats. Taxpayer Services did get a $75 million increase, which is a start, and I do commend the subcommittee for that, but still imposing draconian cuts on the IRS is no recipe for improved service, greater tax compliance, and it certainly does not send the right message to those people who are cheating our government by failing to pay their taxes. And with that, I yield back, and I appreciate the chairman for yielding.
Thank you. Other members? Ms. Rev.
Is this on? Yes. I have a motion, but I wanted to say a quick thing.
Well, before you make a motion, is there any other members that'd like to be heard?
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, I already used perhaps my time, but the chairman of the committee, Mr. Rogers, is my friend, and I know we use that phrase a lot, but we really are friends.
Yeah.
In fact, I have to give him a picture today that we took of taken of each other. It's a very nice picture. I'll get it to you sometime during the day. He keeps saying that, you know, I need to come along and see the light and so on. I think one of the ways that we can do that this year and next year and the next couple of years is for this committee not to be seen as the committee that does away with laws that already exist. I wasn't around when Social Security started. From what I've read, it got tweaked quite a bit to become the Social Security it is today. And if you tell people we're getting rid of Social Security, you're going to have a serious problem on your hands. I am old enough to remember Medicare. Medicare was supposed to be Johnson's socialist program that's going to end the country and the society as we know it. It got tweaked a lot, and I'll try to get rid of Medicare. So yes, maybe the Obamacare needs some tweaking, but not to be gotten rid of. And this committee seems to have that as one of its goals, and people would like to see this committee do that. And lastly, people in my city, and I'll take whatever blame comes our way, you know, on Wall Street, some things that were not nice. And all the SEC and Dodd-Frank does is Dodd-Frank was not two members of the House and the Senate getting up one day and saying, let's pass a bill today. Let's not work on a bill. It was a result of a serious problem, just like the Patriot Act was a result of an attack on our nation. And so we can change that too, if it needs to be changed. But to suggest that we get rid of it through this committee or defund it is wrong. And lastly, first of all, I'm sorry for those of you that have heard it a million times, but I was born in American territory. Some would call it a colony. I'll be darned if I treat Washington, D.C. the way I don't like the place that I was born in to be treated by the federal government. I did not run for the Washington, D.C. City Council. I ran for the U.S. Congress. And I think what happens, not necessarily in this committee, but throughout this Congress, is that you have a lot of people who can't get certain issues back home, but they get them on D.C. And so I'm against this and I'm against that. Where? In your district? No, in D.C. And I think that has to end. I think people have to see that the people of D.C. deserve the right to govern themselves within, you know, constitutional limitations that we have to deal with. I understand that, but we impose more than the Constitution mandates, and for me it's very personal. I'll end with this. When I became chairman of this committee, I said I'd probably be the first member in Congress ever to want to give up power. D.C. runs its own life, the happier I'll be. I don't need the power as ranking member or chairman to oversee it. So you're right, Mr. Chairman Rogers. I want to make this bill better, and I want to be able to support it. And I tell you, last year, we were almost there, and then at the last moment, the Senate did a number on us, you know, on Dodd-Frank, and that held everything up. So we can work together and keep doing it right. But we have a wonderful subcommittee chairman, and I didn't get off on the wrong side of the bed. It's just that the Yankees lost last night. That'll destroy anybody.
Thank you. Are there other members that would like to be heard before we have a motion from Ms. Herrera Butler? Then I'll recognize Ms. Herrera Butler for a motion.
Can I?
And to make a comment before she makes a motion.
I wanted to say I actually am very proud of the committee's work. And I really appreciate attention on a couple things. The liquidity in capital markets, fraudulent and mismanaged tax returns, that's been eye-opening, and an overzealous Consumer Product Safety Commission, and many more. So with that, it's been a pleasure to work on this bill, and I move that the chairman's mark be reported to the full committee.
All those in favor of the motion say yay. Yay. All opposed say no. The bill is approved, and I ask unanimous consent that the staff be authorized to make technical and conforming adjustments to the items approved today. Without objection, so ordered, members are reminded to leave their copies of the bill and report on the table for the staff to collect. Thank you. The meeting is adjourned.
Congratulations. Thank you. Good work.